Tensions continue on the border with U.S. agents firing tear gas at asylum seekers in Mexico. Concerns mount over storage of nuclear waste canisters at San Onofre. A cyber attack temporarily cripples newspaper deliveries, and some defendants hope to avoid jail by claiming mental illness. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer. Joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today, watchdog reporter Greg Moran of the San Diego Union-Tribune, KPBS border reporter Gene Guerrero, Jeff Light, publisher and editor-in-chief of the Union-Tribune, and Allison St. John, who covers North County for KPBS. Border tensions escalated in the early hours of New Year's Day when a group of asylum seekers from Central America attempted to breach a border fence. U.S. authorities responded by firing tear gas into Mexico. And Gene, there's a big dispute in this story between what the Border Patrol says happened and journalists who were there, right?
That's right. So Homeland Security has described these people, 150 migrants, as a violent mob. President Trump has said that they charged the border. CBP has said that they fired the tear gas in response to rocks being thrown. But all of the witnesses who I spoke to who were on the scene, journalists, activists, tell me that the group was silently waiting next to the border wall, and that nothing was thrown into the United States until after the first canister came across the border. And so one person mentioned to me that they saw one person throw a rock after the tear gas was fired. One person saw someone throw a smoke canister back across the border. But everyone who was there has told me that the violence was a result of the tear gas being thrown.
Well, let's lay this out in the stark contrast here, and we've got a visual on this. And this is Homeland Security. Once again, we've had a violent mob of migrants attempt to enter the United States illegally by attacking our agents with projectiles. Our personnel use minimum force necessary to defend themselves. And here's Enrique Morones of the Border Angels, their take on events. Last night, Border Patrol again tear gas and shot rubber bullets at migrants, including women and children, after women and children were shot at. Some migrants threw rocks, as you say. Misrepresentation of the facts, violence and death is unacceptable and criminal. You were talking to some photographers, as you said, who were actually there covering the event.
Yeah, and I've tried following up with CBP and DHS a couple of times, and I've been told that public affairs is furloughed as a result of the government shutdown, so I'm not able to have any of my questions answered as to what actually happened. The government says that nobody was hurt and that they used the minimum force necessary, but I spoke to a journalist who, as she was running away from the tear gas, she was hit in the leg with some kind of pellet, and it left a large bruise. The journalists who were there say that that women and children, pretty much everyone who was there was affected by the tear gas.
I noticed that the Border Patrol statement suggested that they just threw the tear gas at the people who were throwing rocks, not at the people trying to cross the border. But I mean, that's not something you can contain.
That's right.
It spreads.
That's right. And the people I spoke to who were there say that the tear gas was directly into the area where all of the migrants were, and so most people were affected.
Now, these folks they're trying to get onto U.S. soil, right? And then they, under our law and international law and treaties, they can claim asylum and get into the process to see if they have a valid claim. Isn't that right?
Yeah. So I'm not totally sure what percentage of the group was hoping to ask for asylum, but from the people who were there, they say that the intention of a majority of the group was to ask for asylum, to jump the fence and then present themselves immediately to authorities and ask for asylum. One of the interesting things is that there were Antifa protests, Antifa activists they were on the scene as well. So anti-fascist, left-wing extreme groups. And the journalists who I spoke to who saw them, they say that they saw them actually helping these people cross illegally, helping get children over the fence. I spoke to the activists themselves, and they say that they didn't want to comment. They didn't want to confirm or deny whether or not they were helping people cross illegally. What they did say is that they were there, about 11 protesters, including Antifa, and they were supposedly there to document human rights abuses and to administer medical aid. So they were helping with the tear gas. they had brought milk with magnesia to help get rid of some of those effects.
Now, you referenced the border shutdown. Of course, this is not happening in a vacuum. We've got President Trump insisting on his wall and the funding, the $5+ billion for that. The Democrats in taking over the House are certainly not willing at this point to do that. Meanwhile, it's affecting agents and those who work the border, Homeland Security and immigration judges and all sorts of folks directly involved here. The irony seems lost on some people.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that, this major incident that just occurred at our border, I'm not able to get any answers to my questions because Public Affairs is allegedly furloughed. But then at the same time, you see Border Patrol and CBP Twitter accounts being regularly updated. So you wonder, okay, well, who's working and why are my questions not being answered?
Right.
Curious what
Greg?
the reaction or the temperature is in Mexico to this kind of an event when they fired the tear gas. I assume some of it landed in Mexico. But just within, we're so focused on what's coming towards us. I'm kind of curious what the people in Tijuana or the Mexican government has been saying, either about the Border Patrol tactics or the actions of the caravan members.
Well, so they want an investigation. The Mexican government has asked for an investigation into the tear gas incident to find out exactly what happened and whether it was a fair use of force.
And they want the United States to do that, or are they going to do their own?
They want the United States. It looks like the countries are going to work together to get to the bottom of what happened there. But there's still about 3,000 people waiting to get into the United States at various shelters. And one of the difficulties is that while most of these people want to ask for asylum, they're getting a lot of contradictory information about how the best way to do that is. There's a group. I mentioned the Antifa people who were there to try to help these people cross allegedly. There's also a group called BAM that is disseminating flyers telling people, don't put your names on the wait list to ask for asylum. You should cross the border illegally. That is the best way to get asylum. And so there are other groups, advocacy organizations that are trying to counter that and tell them, no, you should do it the right way.
Right.
It's interesting. That's one of the conflict points, right? Though, in addition to the kind of the tear gas you're crossing, we're not this idea about where and how you apply for asylum, right? The Trump administration says you have to go to the ports of entry. You have to get in line and do it. And a lot of lawyers and people say, no, you just cross and you throw your hands up and say asylum, and it's like they can't even just decide on what the proper way is to do that.
Well, we're out of time in this segment, but we'll be looking forward to more reporting on this. Obviously, it's a fluid and chaotic situation, and much more to come in this new year on that. Well, work may resume this month burying canisters of nuclear waste at San Onofre. The seaside plant 50 miles north of downtown San Diego was shut down in 2013 after replacement steam generators failed. The critical challenge remaining, what to do with the remaining nuclear waste. And Allison, the plan has been, of course, to bury it on site, but tell us about the near miss last summer here, which has got people very concerned.
That was the event that really brought it to the public's attention, but I think it's sort of a series of mishaps that the NRC is now investigating. But basically a whistleblower came forward at one of the community engagement panel meetings, which are run by Edison, and said that one of the canisters, which are 17 foot tall and more than 50 pounds in weight, tons rather, I beg your pardon, that one of them had gotten stuck as it was being put inside of the concrete container at the top. And so it was almost for an hour sort of dangling. They took away all the supports because they thought it had gone down in, because they didn't have spotters that were really visually checking that it had gone in. And it hung there without any support for about an hour. So the fear was, could it have fallen the 17 feet? And if so, what would have happened to the contents, the radioactive spent fuel?
So no sensors, no way to really know once it's in that cylinder what's going on?
No. Holtec International, which has designed it, says, look, this is an inert, situation. You don't need sensors inside. At some point, aging management, we will design something that will be able to crawl down inside a little half-inch clearance between the canister and its container and figure out whether the canister is cracked. But at the moment, there is no sensors designed into the containers.
And your story notes, it's not just anti-nuclear activists who are ringing the alarm bells right now. It's people who are sympathetic to nuclear.
I think that's interesting because, you know, there are many people who argue that nuclear power is the only way we can avoid the effects of climate change. And I think that's a valid question. So whether you support nuclear power or not, I think there's still an issue that we need to be very vigilant about what is going on at San Onofre. Because, you know, financially it does make sense for the company. They want to go on and start generating new energy somewhere else. They don't want to be spending a lot of money on storing nuclear waste. They thought that the government would take responsibility for it, and that hasn't turned out to be the case. So is there some kind of shortchanging going on in this very delicate and potentially dangerous situation?
Well, as I say, one of the folks who's supportive generally of nuclear, retired Admiral Len Herring, former head of the Navy in San Diego, advocate, and we got a clip from him. Let's hear that.
I'm an advocate for nuclear energy. I'm not a believer that it needs to disappear. But the proper handling of the material is what we are talking about here. The decommissioning of the Songs plant involves the handling and the storage of nuclear waste in a fashion that is, for all practical purposes, not being done safely for us.
Right. So what does he mean specifically about that? I mean, they don't know, as we've said, when it's going down there, if it's bumping, getting gouged.
Yes, he's actually, you know, paying attention to the NRC's results of their special investigation into this event, which suggests that there was a very lacking in oversight. There were procedures that were not really properly put in place. They'd already had some near accidents earlier and nothing had been done to correct it. The new people who were actually operating the equipment that day were not told about the potential problems of getting hung up on the ring. There's just a sense that there wasn't good procedures or oversight or management of this.
And what does Edison say about all this?
Well, Edison is saying that they actually agree with the NRC's special report. So they're saying we are going to correct all this. This is something that, you know, we can correct, so trust us, we will be able to do it right in the future. I think there is a bit of a history of Edison showing that they may not be able to be trusted, or at least that you have to keep a close eye on what they're doing, because we saw what happened with the steam generators. That was
well, yeah, if you
situation.
look at the reason the plant was shut in the first place.
I have to say that there's something kind of Rube Goldbergish, it sounds like, about this whole thing. Is this a kind of a standard industry practice, that this is how you bury it?
Yes.
You put it in this canister, kind of fit it down in there, and hope everything goes okay? I mean,
well,
can we do better than that?
There are other nuclear power plants around
Really?
the country that are doing the same thing. This is an established model. And, you know, the canisters are very thin. They're less than half an inch thick. You might argue, and many people do, that they should be thicker, but the United States has designed it that way, those regulations. I think the key thing is that things have changed since the design was made. We don't have Yucca Mountain anymore, and they designed it so that you could take everything to Yucca Mountain and everything would be standardized. They'd all be in these little canisters and the same, well, they're large, but they're thin, so that it would be standardized. And so Edison was doing what they were supposed to do. The situation has changed. We no longer have Yucca Mountain.
A couple seconds left. What happens if we get a leak in one of these things?
Well, there's different accounts of that, and that's actually the next thing I'm going to work on is, you know, what if? Because you could generate a lot of fear, but I think we need to understand a little bit more what the risks actually are. Could it affect, you know, just a minor leak that could affect maybe Interstate 5 and the railway line?
China syndrome, those of us old enough to remember that.
Could it, you know, 50 miles downtown San Diego is affected, so the implications are not pleasant to contemplate if a major event were to happen down
All right,
the road.
we'll look forward to that follow-up. Well, we'll move on. Many of us expecting our daily newspapers to be delivered last Saturday morning were disappointed. The San Diego Union-Tribune, Los Angeles Times, several other big papers suffered a cyber attack. It resulted in the biggest disruption of newspaper production and printing in decades. And just start there with what happened. Why did so many of us miss our papers that morning?
Yeah, the newspaper, even though it's a very old analog product, the production process of delivering your newspaper and producing that newspaper is, like everything in life now, highly computerized. So the company that we use to do our newspaper production, our former owner, Tribune Publishing, runs a production system that serves newspapers from the East Coast to here. I think 12 papers in all, including us and the LA Times. And those production systems were attacked by a malware virus that locked us out of our systems a week ago today. And yeah, I think it's the first time so many papers were not delivered in San Diego, at least since World War II.
So who did
Alice,
it?
go
I mean,
ahead.
this is a big question. And why did they do it?
She's dying to ask, who is it? Where's get to the mystery of it?
Well, I'm not super privy to the investigation because the attack is really on Tribune Publishing, our previous owners. It's a publicly traded company, so they're constrained in a lot of ways about their ability to communicate. But it looks like it was what is known as a Ryuk virus. We reported that in our stories, and I think enough people have seen their corrupted files, actually, to see the file extensions and know what it is. But actually knowing who that is, the whole point of this is that you're not to know, right? The little bit that is out there from the consultants who look at these kinds of things, it looks like it's a successor to a North Korean virus called the Hermes virus that came out a year ago, 2017. This Ryuk virus has first seen just this summer, I think in August. They were making a lot of money on it just in the first few weeks. Some of the accounts had about $600,000 in ransom paid.
You should know that's the motive. It's ransom and to cash in on that.
Yeah, it's a whole profession, right?
Did someone make some money off this?
I don't think so, no. Although the Tribune Publishing response is not public, but looking at how the company has responded and the progress that we've made against the difficulty, no, it doesn't look like, they've folded over and paid.
So the motive really looks like ransom. In other words, they're not going after delivering the free press and delivering the news product or some reason. I mean, you could have been an auto parts distributor or
right,
a
agreed.
plumbing supply.
Yeah, Greg and I were just talking about this. I don't really take this as an attack on the press, and we've seen many of those this year, so much as an attack on a big company with time-sensitive demands in their business and the wherewithal to pay. I think that would be more the model of what they're going after.
Right. So that fit. Now, you talked about the virus, and I understand you have the Tribune company is going to be secretive about this because obviously you're in a battle here. You got a whole major security system going on. But why was the UT? It determined most papers didn't get out at all, and explain that a little bit. That had something to do with where the UT's run is in the LA Times.
I think a little bit the luck of the draw, a little bit of the logistics because we're far from our printing facility in LA. But some of it, I think, is just the randomness of where the virus got to. I know that the South Florida papers were affected at a similar scope as our own. Papers in Chicago and New York got out. LA, a little bit in between. But since we are printed in LA, we've got a long drive, and people through the night were working, really, I'd say heroically, to try to get the paper out. That paper for Saturday, the Saturday distribution is about 110,000 households. It's a lot of households when you really start looking at the details.
It's not like the Sunday paper, but it's still a lot.
So the logistics of getting that delivered are pretty extensive. And that paper is supposed to go on the press at about 10 p.m. and be finished printing before 1. And those papers are supposed to be getting here at 2 and 3 in the morning. At 7:30 in the morning, I was still getting texts. Okay, we've got it running. So people with like incredible determination, I think, continued on working through the night, even when it became apparent, the paper's not going to get delivered. And yet, and the note I got from the press room in the morning said, we have continued our tradition of publishing every day. And after that, the news is less good. Like, nobody's going to get it delivered. And subscribers are not going to have to pay, obviously, for Saturday's paper. But I think it really showed the character of the people and the effort that they put in. I mean, imagine on the holiday weekend, the numbers of people who had to respond to the crisis and come in on their vacations on a holiday and work through the night in this futile effort. It's pretty inspiring, really.
All right. Well, we'll see what happens going forward, but we're all hopeful that you fight back in the counter battle.
And I will say, not completely resolved, although largely resolved. Our little scorecard is mostly green on computer systems now. There's a couple yellows still out there, so the company seems to have done a good job responding.
All right. Well, we're going to move on. A new state law allows certain criminal defendants with mental illness to be diverted from jail into treatment. It's controversial. So far, it's been granted sparingly, especially in San Diego. And Greg, your story opens with a police chase in Carlsbad. Start with the details, because that you use that case because it's emblematic.
It was, and it was one of the few successful cases under this law. This was a fellow who, was attempted to be pulled over by the police in Carlsbad. He took off. A brief chase ensued up Cannon Road, and they caught him and arrested him and charged him with evading a police officer. It's kind of, this happens with some frequency, and
straightforward case.
Pretty much. And then when he went to court to answer up these charges, his lawyer asked for relief under this new law, this mental health diversion law. And the argument was he has a mental illness. I think, if I recall, he's a long-time schizophrenic, a very lengthy record of psychiatric history and treatment, that was a contributing factor to why he fled the police and why he was being pulled over in the first place. And therefore, he should qualify for this diversionary treatment into this diversion into treatment for his illness.
And it worked in his case.
Well, it worked. We'll see if it works. He was successful in the first step, which is to get diverted, and that's kind of how the law works. So, the way
you don't go to jail; you're going into treatment.
Don't, right? Your criminal proceedings are suspended or stopped, and then you go into this treatment plan, which you've told the court about, and you have a treating physician and things like that. You report back regularly.
It seems like a good change in the law. Why is the law enforcement body objecting to it?
Three things probably. One is the way that this law came about. It was slipped into a trailer bill, which are these large end-of-session budget bills, these grab bags where the people are just voting and really not voting what they're voting on. So it's put in. It didn't go through any hearings. There was no analysis by the Legislative Analyst's Office. There was no opportunity to lobby or anything like that. It was put into this bill that essentially funds the government. It was the 15th of 20 separate items in this bill that included things like needle exchange and Medicaid eligibility. And then it becomes law. And it's potentially a very substantial change to the criminal justice system, vests the judges with a lot of discretionary authority about who goes and who doesn't, and really no guidelines to it. The law itself is like 3, 4, 5 paragraphs.
Is it a bit of a challenge to the mental health system to say that, you need to provide more?
Although they welcomed it, and I think I should say that I think that the motivations for the law are kind of good. As many of us know who've covered courts, a substantial portion of people who come to court or are arrested or get in trouble do have an underlying mental health issue, and for decades our response has been, you're guilty, go to jail, here are some pills. There isn't a whole lot of treatment. The idea of this is to stop that at the front end, try to get them some help and treatment. The diversion can last up to 2 years. You report regularly back to the judge in the court. If you goof up or screw up or something bad happens or the judge just doesn't think it's working, diversion is stopped and the criminal case proceeds. If you successfully make it, though, your criminal charges are wiped out. It's like it never happened.
But it's not available to all defendants, right? And not just everybody can claim this.
Now it's not. The initial iteration of the law just opened it up. So this was really the impetus for the resistance from law enforcement was it was just anybody who was charged with a crime. So their concern was murderers, rapists, violent assault people could go in and say...
It's hard to define mental health, yeah.
So a few months after that, after this great hue and cry, which was kind of motivated not just by the implications of the law as it was initially drafted, but also the way it came about, they amended it. And now there is a list of 8 or 9 offenses for which you are ineligible for treatment. That includes murder, manslaughter, rape, child abuse, a lot of 290 sexual offenses and things like that, where you can't. That seems to have sort of tamped down some of the anger about it, but there is still an enormous amount of resistance here in San Diego and I think across the state from prosecutors about this law. They see it as essentially kind of a dodge or a backdoor for people to not just to avoid the court system or punishment, but to walk away with a clean record.
But are we getting a ton of defendants trying to go this route?
So I inquired about this, I think, mid-December before the holidays, and in San Diego they had, I think, 17 cases, 18 cases, not many. It was interesting, many of the offenses were pretty minor offenses, a lot of misdemeanors, some low-level felonies, no big...
Crazy actions, that's what they're claiming. Right?
Exactly.
The question is whether there'll be the treatment that, would be the more appropriate response to that behavior.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that was kind of one of the issues in there. As I said, there have been 2 cases that where the judges have granted diversion, 15 where they've denied it. All 17 of those cases at that time, the prosecutors had said no to any kind of diversion. The difference
what
seems to be...
distinguishes between who's successful with it and who...
It's hard to say, and I didn't look at all the files, but I think one of the things was in the two that were successful, they had very, very detailed treatment plans. They said, this doctor, this treatment, this amount of time, we're going to look at this outcome, and things like that. Some of the other cases, they had a diagnosis. They had a doctor saying, yes, he has or she has a mental illness. We can treat them this way, and it wasn't as specific. And I think the judges, who are probably a little wary of this law, want to know what they're doing and want to know what they're in for.
And who's going to follow up and make sure it happens.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, it'll be interesting to see if there is kind of the infrastructure in the mental health community to absorb and to handle these people. The law does seem to indicate that the county should set up a kind of a separate diversion treatment program for these people. That hasn't happened yet.
All right, we'll watch on the follow-ups on that. A lot of good stories to follow up on today. Well, we are out of time. That wraps up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, reporter Greg Moran of the Union-Tribune, KPBS reporter Gene Guerrero, Jeff Light, publisher of the Union-Tribune, and reporter Allison St. John, who covers North County for KPBS. And a reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Happy New Year, and thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.